In 1940, Hattie McDaniel became not only the first person of color to win an Academy Award for her performance in Gone with the Wind, but she was also the first to even be nominated at all, and also the first to ever attend the Oscar ceremony. Which all makes Hattie McDaniel's Oscar win one of the most notable moments in Academy history, one whose importance and impact was recognized right away at the time, and is also still discussed until this day. But at the same time, it's also a, let's say, complicated win, appreciated for the significance behind it, but hotly debated for the actual recognition on the screen. The fact that Hattie McDaniel achieved this milestone for the role of a slave was and remains highly controversial, an apparent confirmation that this was the only kind of role for a black actress that the white voting body of the Academy felt comfortable to honor. And I don't want to say that there isn't some truth in this. But at the same time, it feels that Hattie McDaniel's Oscar story is occasionally overshadowed by this perspective. Because at the end of the day, her win, like almost all others in Oscar history, was the combination of various factors that all had to come together perfectly for this moment to happen. The right actress with the necessary name recognition, the right part in the right movie, and the needed support from the industry. And this is what I want to look at in this video. The dynamics of Hattie McDaniel's Oscar win and how her narrative allowed her to triumph over the other 4 nominees in this category. It's therefore important for me to highlight that this video will only focus on the Oscar race of 1939. As I just said, there's a lot to talk about in regards to Hattie McDaniel's career and her success in Gone with the Wind. From the question how we can deal with the themes of the movie today, to the racist politics at the time that didn't even allow Hattie to attend the premiere of the movie in Atlanta or sit with her co-stars at the Oscar ceremony, right to how black audiences at the time reacted to Gone with the Wind, and the criticism Hattie received for the roles she played, and the complaints aimed at her for supporting the status quo of roles available for black performers. But again, this is not the topic of this video. In order to analyze how Hattie McDaniel was able to win the Best Supporting Actress Oscar, I will instead focus on the different aspects that helped her to stand out in Hollywood, how her persona was received at the time, and how she could connect with the necessary target groups most important for this kind of recognition: audiences, critics, columnists, studio insiders, and Oscar voters who all looked like this. So to understand Hattie McDaniel's historic Oscar win, let's start with a look at her 1939 co-nominees, their performances, narratives, advantages and disadvantages in this race. First, Geraldine Fitzgerald in Wuthering Heights. Based on the famous novel by Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights was United Artists' big prestige project for 1939, directed by William Wyler, and featuring Hollywood star Merle Oberon as the female lead Cassie. For the male lead, the dark and brooding Heathcliff, Wyler was determined to hire British stage idol Laurence Olivier, who was still waiting for his big break in motion pictures. However, the actor had not been overly pleased with his previous Hollywood experiences so far, and was also currently enjoying his secret relationship with British actress Vivien Leigh, both of whom were still married at the time, and had no interest to leave her behind while working in the US. But Vivien herself finally convinced him to accept, arguing that it made no sense to reject a great opportunity just because he wanted to stay with her. Vivien actually had the chance to come to Hollywood together with Olivier when United Artists asked her to play the supporting role of Isabella, but this wasn't the kind of role Vivien saw as a step ahead for herself, and she declined the offer, preferring to wait for something better to come along. Probably not the worst decision. And Vivien was certainly also right about convincing Olivier to play Heathcliff, as Wuthering Heights did turn out to be his big breakthrough in the US, even if he personally cared neither for his own performance, nor his co-star Merle Oberon, nor the finished film itself. However, he did later acknowledge that one good thing came out of it all: the performance of the actress who eventually played Isabella after Vivien Leigh had declined, Geraldine Fitzgerald. Born in 1913 in Ireland, Geraldine studied painting at the Metropolitan School of Art in Dublin, before changing her focus to acting. Her natural talent very quickly led to various roles in British movies, and she also made her Broadway debut in 1938 in Bernard Shaw's Heartbreak House with Orson Welles. This appearance quickly caught the attention of Hollywood's talent scouts, and intrigued by the chance to work in American movies, Geraldine signed a contract with Warner Brothers. And her first year in Hollywood was pretty much the kind of success story every newcomer dreams of, appearing as Bette Davis's best friend in Warner's big VP Dark Victory, and as the aforementioned Isabella in Wuthering Heights. Geraldine Fitzgerald's rise to fame was warmly welcomed by critics in the US, who were largely unaware of her previous work in England, and often considered Wuthering Heights her debut performance, praising her as one of the most important newcomers of 1939. Even though I personally would say that her work in Dark Victory got more overall critical acclaim than Wuthering Heights, some reviews stating that it gave her better opportunities to display her splendid dramatic talents, critics definitely also appreciated her work as Isabella, calling her excellent, highlighting her understanding of the role, and stating that, despite all the talent involved, she was the one walking off with the movie's acting honors. In the end, it's probably no surprise that the Academy nominated her for Wuthering Heights instead of Dark Victory, which was overall mostly seen as a Bette Davis vehicle, while Wuthering Heights felt more ensemble-driven and, quote, important.
What made Isabella so rich a character for you to play, do you think?
Well, at first, I didn't want to do it. I didn't like the character. I thought she was kind of a wimp. That word didn't exist there. And I also thought she was a loser. And I didn't like playing a loser. I wanted to play a winner. So I didn't like her. But as I got into it and played, I did. I liked her very much. I think she was quite wonderful, her devotion to Heathcliff and the way she stayed with him.
But despite the strong start in Hollywood, Geraldine Fitzgerald's career did not continue the way it had been expected by many in the industry. She appeared in other prestige productions like Watch on the Rhine or Wilson, but Geraldine always preferred the stage to the screen, returning to theatre productions again and again, later gaining raves for her work in Long Day's Journey into Night or as a cabaret singer, and she was also one of the first women to receive a Tony Award nomination for Best Direction of a Play. She died in 2005 at the age of 91. The next two nominees for Best Supporting Actress were two of the most original character actresses Hollywood had ever seen. Described by Photoplay as a lovely little lady, Maria Ouspenskaya carved a niche during the 1930s and 40s as maybe physically small, but still very intimidating and overpowering personalities, often of noble descent, and accompanied by a thick yet vague European accent. Born in Russia sometime between 1867 and 1887, seriously, people in 1939 had no idea if Maria was 72 or 52, she first intended to be a singer, studying at the Warsaw Conservatory, before joining the School of Drama in Moscow. In 1911, she then became a member of the Moscow Art Theatre, founded among others by Konstantin Stanislavski, where she appeared in over 100 different plays, and also began to teach the so-called Stanislavski method to younger performers. While touring the US in 1924, the actress, who had suffered through the Russian Revolution, decided that she wanted to stay in the West, later saying, "I got myself settled in America and I've never had the slightest inclination to get away from it." To avoid deportation, she then founded her own acting school in New York, where she taught, among others, a young Anne Baxter, and she also built a reputation as a highly talented stage performer. When her school was in danger of running out of money, she decided to lend her talents to the big screen as well, making her first movie appearance in Dodsworth, for which she also received a Best Supporting Actress nomination, and she then worked in Conquest opposite Greta Garbo and Charles Boyer, a co-star with whom she developed a very friendly relationship, which then led to her casting as his grandmother in the 1939 drama Love Affair, co-starring Irene Dunne. Today, Love Affair is mostly known better as its remake An Affair to Remember with Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr, which follows pretty much the same story. Boyer and Irene Dunne meet on a boat, fall in love, are happy and carefree, but then tragedy strikes. For director Leo McCarey, it was this sudden change from a light-hearted romantic comedy at the beginning to the more serious drama in the second half that did not work in the script. Unsure how to proceed, Charles Boyer finally suggested turning the originally much less significant scene with Maria Ouspenskaya into the movie's most important moment that symbolized this shift to something more serious and meaningful. Maria herself was very happy with her small role, stating in a rare interview at the time, "The director was understanding, creative and kind. Every person connected with the film, actors, electricians and cameramen, loved their work and did not want to break away from the atmosphere. In other words, I enjoyed this work very much." And reviewers enjoyed watching her probably even more, calling her brief performance exceptional, outstanding, delicate, sincere, and a joy to watch. Maria continued to act in Hollywood movies over the next few years, from mysteries to adventures and even westerns, until her death in 1949. When she died, newspapers called her one of the most respected and admired artists the screen and the stage had ever seen. She herself explained her talent as, "First, I should say a capacity for hard work. Second, perhaps, an ability to get the most out of one's five senses. And then thirdly, an agreement, a contract between oneself and God. That's talent." The second very unique character actress in this lineup was Edna May Oliver. Like Maria Ouspenskaya, she was an actress immediately noticeable due to her distinct features and characteristics, Edna herself always stating that she took her, quote, "horse face" and made a career out of it.
"I've got a long face and I poke it where I please."
Often considered a British actress because of her appearance in various Charles Dickens adaptations, the Massachusetts-born performer was a true original, a veteran of the stage and screen who enjoyed chewing the scenery and specialized in playing sharp-tongued spinsters or old maids in historical pictures. Edna May Oliver, who had been working as an actress from the age of 14, celebrated her first big success at the age of 34 in the 1917 Broadway hit musical Oh Boy, and then received loud critical acclaim for her appearance in the Pulitzer Prize-winning play Icebound in 1923 and in the original production of Showboat in 1927. In 1930, she became one of RKO's most important comedians when she appeared in Half Shot and Sunrise opposite the comedy duo Wheeler and Woolsey. During this time, she also appeared in the Best Picture winner Cimarron and opposite Katharine Hepburn in Little Women, but her more remembered work came when she signed a contract with MGM in 1935, bringing her theatrical style to movies like David Copperfield, A Tale of Two Cities, or Romeo and Juliet. In 1939, she had one of her most popular roles in John Ford's western Drums Along the Mohawk. While the movie itself was met with mixed reviews, critics certainly preferred Ford's other 1939 western Stagecoach, Edna May Oliver did generate a lot of positive notes, as articles stated that the role allowed her, like no other before, to mix her distinct comedic style with depth and humanity, and that she easily overshadowed her bigger co-stars Henry Fonda and Claudette Colbert. Frank Nugent wrote in the New York Times that Miss Oliver could not have been bettered as the warlike widow McClenna, with a tongue sharper than a tomahawk. Unfortunately, Edna May Oliver did only a few more movies after her recognition by the Academy, including Pride and Prejudice, before she died from cancer in 1942 on her 59th birthday. Looking at these three nominees so far, you can make easy cases for each of them to win the Best Supporting Actress Oscar that year. Geraldine Fitzgerald was a new sensation, an actress who appeared destined to become a big star and who had the benefit of two highly acclaimed performances in movies that were very much on the Academy's radar. Maria Ouspenskaya was clearly the most respected actress among these three contenders, receiving her second Oscar nomination in the category's 4-year existence for another performance with only a few minutes of screen time, emphasizing the admiration and appreciation for her work by the industry. But personally, I feel that if the circumstances that year had been different, Edna May Oliver might have taken this award. Her style might appear outdated today, but she was clearly very beloved at the time. She had worked with a lot of big names in the industry and starred in many prestige pictures along the way. She had certainly paid her dues, and while the politics of drums along the Mohawk have pretty much aged just as poorly as those of the year's Best Picture winner, the movie was one of the 10 biggest box office hits of the year, and the role of Mrs. McClenagh pretty much written as a scene stealer from start to finish. Today we most likely roll our eyes at a scene like this, but in 1939 it's pretty much tailor-made to get the audience to cheer for her, and she even, spoiler alert, got a big dramatic death scene on top of it. So all of these 3 nominees definitely had their own intriguing narratives and personal advantages in this race. But in the end, they all also had the same problem. None of them were in this. I don't think it's necessary to go into the details of Gone with the Wind or the story behind it. When Margaret Mitchell's story of the Old South was published in 1936, it became pretty much the biggest bestseller the world had ever seen, and once David O. Selznick acquired the movie rights for the unheard sum of $50,000, the entire country immediately began to speculate about the casting of the principal roles. And while of course Scarlett O'Hara was always the biggest point of interest for movie fans and columnists, Selznick was equally determined to do whatever was necessary to find the perfect performers for all other principal roles as well. Olivia de Havilland's rise to stardom had been relatively smooth and fast. After she had starred as Hermia in Max Reinhardt's stage production of A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Hollywood Bowl, she was given a contract with Warner Brothers to reprise the role on the big screen, and then was immediately cast in various different projects and genres over the next few years. Famously opposite Errol Flynn in Captain Blood or The Adventures of Robin Hood, or in Warner's big prestige adaptation of Anthony Adverse. However, all of this was not easy for Olivia de Havilland. She was constantly exhausted from being thrown from one project right into the next without any time to regain her energy. And she also quickly became fed up with the kinds of roles that Warner wanted her to play over and over again. The devoted love interest, the girl who stays behind while her man experiences many adventures. Especially compared to Warner's first lady of the screen, Bette Davis, Olivia considered her roles downright disappointing.
I had been playing ingenues, and their experience is very limited as characters in a film. They meet the hero and the heroine, or the ingenue, fall in love, or they don't fall in love, but eventually they fall in love, and then the hero pursues the ingenue, and will she say yes or will she not say yes? Will her parents give consent? There are all these obstacles, and then finally they get together and you know they're going to sweep off into the sunset. Well, that's all there is to it.
So Olivia began to reject material, which in turn put her on suspension by the studio and did not help her relationship with Jack Warner. But Olivia did not care. She was determined to show that she could be more than just a damsel in distress. She wanted more challenging material. And she found it when she, like the rest of the country, read a novel called Gone with the Wind. But while every other actress immediately cast herself in the central role of Scarlett O'Hara, Olivia was drawn to another character. It was Melanie that attracted me most, because of her admirable qualities and the values that meant so much to her and meant so much to me. I wanted to perpetuate these values, and the perfect way to do that, of course, would be to play the part of Melanie. However, it seemed unlikely that Olivia's interest in Melanie would lead to much, because Jack Warner was not known to loan out his stars to other studios, and her contract did not allow her to simply reach out to Selznick herself. But unknown to her, she was actually already on Selznick's mind for the role. The producer had been impressed with the work she had done at Warner's over the last few years, and he felt that her qualities as an actress might make her the ideal Melanie. Plus, she had already appeared in various Technicolor productions, so he knew that she was suited to this shooting style, writing in one of his memos, I would give anything if we had Olivia de Havilland under contract so that we could cast her as Melanie. But since he didn't, he and George Cukor, who was at this point still set to direct Gone with the Wind, conducted screen tests with other actresses like Andrea Leeds or Anne Shirley, but none of them fulfilled their demands for the role. They wanted to see what Olivia could do with the part.
The phone rang. A voice said, "You don't know me. We've never met. But I am George Cukor. I've been supervising the preparation of Gone with the Wind, and I will be directing the movie. We are in the process of casting, and I would like to know if you would be interested in playing the role of Melanie." Well, I said, I certainly would. And he said, "You're under contract to Warner Brothers. We have no right to ask this of you, but would you come secretly?" I said, "Yes, I'd be delighted to do this highly illegal thing." So I did.
Olivia's audition with Selznick and Cukor had confirmed to them that she was the ideal choice for the role. But Jack Warner had no interest in granting her that opportunity, simply rejecting all of Selznick's inquiries to loan her out for Gone with the Wind. The studio boss wanted to send Olivia, whose attitude towards the studio system was too rebellious for his taste, a clear signal. I am the boss, and I alone control your career. But Olivia again did not submit to Warner's rules and took a maybe unorthodox, but ultimately very successful step to secure the role of Melanie. She talked to Jack Warner's wife and convinced her to speak to him on her behalf. Finally, the studio boss gave up, and Olivia's casting was officially announced in January 1939, together with that of Leslie Howard and Vivien Leigh. For Olivia, the excitement about Gone with the Wind as the movie of course brought her a lot of publicity and attention, but her determination to be involved with the production had different reasons. Melanie was a role that would finally enable her to showcase all her strengths as an actress, to add unexpected complexity to her usual displays of quiet dignity and humbleness, and demonstrate that what seemed to be naivety at first was actually kindness, compassion, and intelligence. Following the announcement of her casting, Olivia also received a personal note from Margaret Mitchell. "I'm sending my sincere good wishes to you. I know better than anyone else how difficult a part Melanie will be. She is one of my favorite characters in the book, and I am looking forward to the day when I will see you portray her on the screen." For Olivia, the popularity of Gone with the Wind meant that it would be very important to create Melanie as closely to the guidelines of Margaret Mitchell as possible. As the book states, she was a tiny, frailly built girl who gave the appearance of a child masquerading in her mother's enormous hoop skirts, an illusion that was heightened by the shy, almost frightened look in her two large brown eyes. It was a sweet, timid face, but a plain face, and she had no feminine tricks of allure to make observers forget its plainness. She looked and was as simple as earth, as good as bread, as transparent as spring water. It was a clear description that Olivia intended to follow with utmost precision. Before the shooting began, George Cukor offered her two options: makeup that would make her look either glamorous or plain. Determined to bring Melanie to life as she was written, she chose plain. Well, a 1939 Hollywood version of plain. But George Cukor not only guided Olivia with the look of Melanie, he also worked very closely with both her and Vivien Leigh on the interpretation of their respective roles. He, for example, encouraged Olivia to learn more about childbearing by visiting a maternity ward in Los Angeles and spending time in the delivery room dressed as a nurse, which seems kind of crazy, but okay. Olivia was therefore understandably crushed when Cukor was fired from Gone with the Wind and replaced by the far more workmanlike Victor Fleming, who had no interest to personally coach his performers, but instead expected them to know what they're doing. However, Olivia remembered Fleming very highly, because he gave her the simple, yet essential advice that she should play Melanie as a woman who always meant what she said.
Nobody could accuse Melanie of being insincere.
When Gone with the Wind was released in December 1939, praise for the movie and its performers was overwhelming and immediate. While most reviews, obviously, focused their attention on Vivien Leigh and the question if she had fulfilled the expectations of audiences, and the answer is an obvious yes, the rest of the cast also received their fair share of praise, and Olivia was called beautiful and sensitive, and that her restraint in the role made the sweetness of Melanie entirely believable. But the praise was not only focused on Olivia's specific performance, because just like she had hoped, critics also put her work in the larger context of her career, noticing that she had finally arrived as a skilled actress and that the part allowed her to show a complexity that had been missing in her work so far. Gone with the Wind was both for Olivia, a step into true movie stardom and a re-evaluation of her abilities as a performer. And so she was understandably hopeful that Melanie would lead to a new chapter in her career, a chapter with better and more demanding material and characters. But unfortunately, Olivia learned very quickly that, no matter how triumphant her success in Gone with the Wind had been, it did not affect the attitude of Jack Warner. In fact, he was probably more displeased with her than ever, upset that Olivia had refused to start working on another secondary role in the private lives of Elizabeth and Essex, while still doing reshoots on Gone with the Wind, and also preparing for the comedy Raffles, and according to some sources, he even banned her from attending the premiere of Gone with the Wind in Atlanta so that she wouldn't miss any workdays. Olivia, of course, did attend the premiere and was put on suspension again shortly after. For her, nothing had changed. She later said about this time, "When the role of Melanie came to me, I was 22 and angry and full of despair. Not only professional despair, because the creative roles I wanted were seldom mine, but personal despair. Despair at what seemed to be the reality of the life around me. The reality of the powerful, brutal kingdom that was Hollywood." It was this despair that famously later caused Olivia to challenge the studio system, which resulted in the groundbreaking de Havilland Law and finally brought her the freedom to guide her own career and get the kinds of roles she always wanted, winning 2 Best Actress Oscars in the process. So coming back to the Best Supporting Actress race of 1939, Olivia's standing as the young ingenue who proved her talents in the biggest movie of all time to overwhelming critical acclaim seems like a perfect narrative to carry her all the way to an Oscar win. But there was ultimately another nominee in this category who had even more advantages on her side: name recognition, the right role, the right movie, the necessary studio support, and the perfect circumstances to turn Oscar night into the greatest moment of her career. So to get a better idea why Hattie McDaniel's Oscar narrative was too strong to ignore in 1939, let's begin with the question of how she built her name recognition and standing in the industry that made her the most popular black actress at the time. Hattie McDaniel, the daughter of former slaves, developed a passion for performing already at a young age, an interest she shared with many members of her family, and she began to tour as a singer and dancer together with her father and brothers when she was 13 years old. Starting in 1920, Hattie McDaniel performed with Professor George Morrison's Melody Hounds, a black touring company where she quickly gained recognition for her comedic talents, newspapers calling her the Black Sophie Tucker. During this time, she also made history as one of the first, if not the very first, black woman to sing on network radio. When stage opportunities dried up during the Great Depression, Hattie McDaniel went to Hollywood in 1931. But for a black actress, jobs in Hollywood were rare and she would earn her living during this time with cooking, sweeping and ironing. She finally got her first uncredited role in 1932's The Golden West, in which she played a loyal house servant. Pretty much the only kind of role available for a black actress in a studio production at the time. It was a harsh reality that Hattie McDaniel accepted as a necessity. If she wanted to act in Hollywood, This was what she had to do. She was not happy about the limited roles available to her, but she also considered acting a job like any other, and she accepted the studio bosses in charge as those telling her what to do and what kinds of parts to play, later famously saying, "I'd rather play a maid and make $700 a week than be a maid for $7. But while Hattie McDaniel maybe never campaigned for better parts or openly complained about those available to her, she also did not completely accept the structural racism of Hollywood, and she found her own kind of rebellion against it. A rebellion that ultimately caused her rise to unprecedented stardom. Following the untimely death of actress Gertrude Howard in 1934, one of the first black actresses to be regularly cast in servant roles, opportunities for Hattie McDaniel increased, and she became one of the most sought-after black performers in Hollywood, alongside Louise Beavers. But both actresses approached the character of the servant/maid/slave differently. While Gertrude Howard's only chance to act in movies had been to embrace the stereotypes, both Beavers and McDaniel tried to reject it in their own ways. Beavers playing her role softly and dignified, while McDaniel symbolized the opposite, outspoken, suspicious and bossy. Yes, she maybe appeared as maids and servants, but never without power or her own agency, because hers were not the kind of servants white audiences were used to. Hattie's strength was in the use of her disapproving scowl, the slightly sarcastic and bossy tone in her voice as she bellowed out her lines, her body language and facial expressions. The script did usually not allow open defiance, but her own particular style and presence that challenged existing stereotypes never made her disapproval of the white people around her a secret. In that way, Hattie McDaniel's maids were rather parodies than real persons, because they existed outside of conventional norms. As reviewers often noted, a maid like Hattie would immediately be fired in real life, but in movies she added a humor that made her characters acceptable and very often even welcomed, and she became essentially the first black woman on the screen to talk back.
Would you say that I look like a lady?
Lawsy, Miss Dollar, I've been with you all too long to insult you that way.
Out of my way, 8-ball.
Who wants to get in your way?
Hilda the door.
I heard it. I ain't deaf. Sometimes I wished I was.
Slowly, Hattie's reputation as a comedic scene stealer with a mind of her own began to grow, and she started to receive more attention and occasional screen credit for her work. Her first real critical praise came for her appearance opposite Katharine Hepburn in Alice Adams, many reviews complimenting her as hilarious for putting the white people around her in their place with just one look. But while these kinds of roles got Hattie a lot of praise, they also again limited what she could play, because as just mentioned, her characters could only exist in a comedic setting. Her open disapproval or backtalking would never have been accepted in more dramatic, aka serious material, where it could easily have offended white audiences. And so it was not her, but Louise Beavers who was cast in the first starring role ever created by a white studio for a black actress in 1935's drama Imitation of Life. Please note that this is in no way meant dismissive of Louise Beavers, who was wonderful in Imitation of Life, and as mentioned before, also had her own way to rebel against the limitations of the Hollywood system. But this casting decision showed that Hattie McDaniel was not considered a serious actress in any way, stuck with the kinds of comedic roles that audiences expected from her. But again, it was a necessity she accepted. If these parts would get her steady employment, she was willing to take them, working basically non-stop and appearing in productions for all major Hollywood studios over the years, with many big names in front of and behind the camera. So we now have a clearer picture of the narrative that Hattie McDaniel had built over the years and the level of name recognition she had achieved against all odds. She was the hardworking character actress who slowly worked her way up in the industry, often praised for her comedic talents and highly welcomed in her brief appearances. But it was also clear that none of the roles she was given would ever bring her even close to an Academy Award. Which brings us to the next part of Hattie's Oscar journey, the right role. And this might be a bit confusing because, after all, Hattie had been playing this kind of role for her entire career. So what made it different in the eyes of people at the time? To answer this question, it is necessary to take a closer look at the impact of the Mammy stereotype in the US in previous decades, and how Margaret Mitchell had made this concept more appealing than ever before to her book's countless white readers. While the first mentions of the so-called Mammy character reach all the way back to the beginning of the 19th century, the stereotype became more prominent after the American Civil War. Today, it is pretty much agreed that the Mammy, as she was imagined during this time, was largely fictitious, part of the antebellum mythology that glorified the South and used to rewrite history by redeeming and romanticizing the concept of slavery itself. The Mammy figure was always presented as a big woman with a large body and a round face, non-threatening and without any sexuality, underlining that the relationship between her and her masters was built entirely on friendship and respect. She was completely devoted to the white family she served and always understanding and accepting her own inferiority. Because of this, she was also given characteristics usually denied to other slaves: self-respecting, independent, loyal, gentle, strong, warm, compassionate, brave, capable, fearless, proud, tender, dignified, competent and trustworthy. And like almost everything else romanticizing the Old South, she found her ultimate and most enduring creation in Gone with the Wind, where Mammy is not only a loyal slave who stays at Tara even after she is free, but essentially a part of the family, the secret head of the plantation, who is running the lives of the O'Haras with almost more power than Scarlett's mother Ellen. And in this role, Mammy has completely internalized the belief system of her white owners, seeing the rules and traditions of the white society around her as the ultimate truth everyone has to reach for, not only a symbol of the Old South, but actively working to keep the status quo alive. As is written by Margaret Mitchell, Mammy was black, but her code of conduct and her sense of pride were as high or higher than those of her owners. The portrayal of Mammy as a black woman fully immersed into the white world around her by also holding a certain position of influence, accepting but also guiding, consequently allowed her to become an important part in Gone with the Wind, because she is always in agreement with the overall narrative and the thinking behind it. Scarlett's goals are her goals. Scarlett's ambitions are something she will fight for until there is breath in her body. Mammy never disrupts the dreams of a better future and the longing for the old past because she shares these emotions with all the white characters in the story, making it consequently easy for Gone with the Wind's white readers to see her less as, quote, one of them, but rather one of us. The complete devotion of Mammy to Scarlett's, the O'Haras, and basically the entire South's cause, and the fact that the book gave the character far more attention and significance than other pieces of literature had done before, quickly turned her into one of Gone with the Wind's most praised and talked about aspects. Mammy was a beloved and popular stereotype in American fiction, and no Mammy was more beloved or popular than that of Margaret Mitchell. So this explains that there is an important difference between Mammy in Gone with the Wind and the servants or slaves that Hattie McDaniel had played so far. In these roles, Hattie usually remained in the background, maybe with some amusing scenes, but ultimately not relevant to the plot. If people had any ideas going into these movies, they were not in regards to her character, but only to Hattie herself, expecting her to display her usual signature style, but not caring about the roles she played. In the case of Mammy, there were preconceived emotions connected to the role. Audiences felt that they knew this character, how she should look and sound, act and behave, and they demanded that these emotions would be represented on the screen as well. It was essentially the first time that white moviegoers were looking forward to the portrayal of a black movie character. Because of all this, David O. Selznick knew that he needed to give Mammy just as much careful consideration when casting his movie version of Gone with the Wind as main characters like Scarlett or Melanie. He had to find the right actress who could embody all these well-known stereotypes and bring the part successfully from the book to the screen. Given that Hattie McDaniel and Louise Beavers were the two most prominent black actresses at the time, and both strongly associated with this kind of role, it's no surprise that they were mentioned very early as frontrunners for the role. However, like with every other major part in the movie, David O. Selznick was keen to test and talk to as many actresses as possible, including Madame Sal Tavan, Bertha Powell and Georgette Harvey, while First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt famously suggested White House cook Elizabeth McDuffie for the role. I don't know exactly why or when Louise Beavers, considered by many at the time to be the most logical choice for the role, dropped out of the casting process, but it seems that Hattie McDaniel made her first big impression on David O. Selznick when she attended a personal interview with him dressed in character. She furthermore got various endorsements from members of the Hollywood community, like her former co-star and Gone with the Wind's leading man Clark Gable, as well as Bing Crosby, who actually didn't know Hattie's name, but wrote to Selznick that he should hire the black actress from Showboat. Hattie was eventually one of the two final contenders for the role together with newcomer Hattie Noel. In December 1938, both of them appeared in the screen tests for the four final Scarlett O'Hara contenders Jean Arthur, Joan Bennett, Paulette Goddard and Vivien Leigh. In her scenes, Hattie could not only demonstrate her instinct for the role, but also a very natural and engaging chemistry with Vivien Leigh. Getting additional attention by appearing in the screen test of the actress who ultimately got the part of Scarlett was the final bit of luck that Hattie had needed, and her casting was announced in January 1939. In the most 1939 way possible. While shooting Gone with the Wind, Hattie McDaniel had to deal with the same challenges as all other cast members when it came to creating her character. The fact that the demands of David O. Selznick made any preparation and planning almost impossible, as the producer often removed, added, or changed scenes from one day to the next. Hattie's co-star Olivia de Havilland had the ongoing help and support of George Cukor to find and develop her character under these circumstances, but Hattie did not receive any similar guidance from Cukor nor from his successor Victor Fleming. But for her, the chaos of the shooting and the lack of support for her work was actually kind of a blessing. For Hattie's entire career, she had basically never been given any guidance from her scripts or her directors about her characters, and this freedom had allowed her to basically direct herself, improvise her scenes by adding her signature style, her little hidden signs of disapproval, and her frankness opposite her co-stars to her parts, without ever having to discuss this approach with anyone else. Hattie had always filled her roles with a life of her own, according to her own ideas, and Gone with the Wind was no different. Only this time, the part was far more substantial than ever before, which also separated this project from all the others she had done so far. With Mammy, Hattie could finally give a real characterization. She was aware of the pressure to fulfill the ideas of Mammy that existed throughout the country, that she had to live up to certain images and expectations, but like she had done so often in her career, she went beyond the stereotypes by sheer willpower and presence. The script gave her more opportunities than her previous movies, allowing her to create an actual person, someone with a definite presence, but her role again only came to life due to Hattie's determination to not be pushed aside, to not let herself become a cliché and give dignity and strength to Mammy every moment she is on the screen. In Gone with the Wind, Hattie could combine her years of experience as a comedic scene stealer with her talents for dramatic profoundness and natural warmth, making her loving and supportive while always being eye to eye with Vivien Leigh Scarlett, independent, confident and self-assured. As Hattie herself said, Mammy was a woman who was fearless, who cringed before no one, who did not talk in whispers, walk on tiptoe, who criticized a white woman's morals, and who showed real emotion. This way, she had created the idea of Mammy that so many readers wanted to see on the screen, but there was a complexity, depth and inner life that carried her far beyond the existing generalization. David O. Selznick had maybe hired Hattie to bring the well-known stereotypes to life, but he quickly realized that she had done much more. When the producer watched an early version of the movie, he was immediately stunned by the impact and dominant presence of her work, stating that, if Married Alone rules, it would entitle her practically to co-starring. And critics across the country immediately agreed. Reviews of Gone with the Wind very often highlighted Hattie McDaniel's work, stating that it was masterful, marvelous and unforgettable, that it came close to stealing the picture from Vivien Leigh, and that audiences would often break in applause whenever she appeared on the screen. Much of this acclaim also came from a certain level of surprise. Hattie had been known for her comedic abilities for quite some time by now, but nobody had ever realized the actual depths of her talents. The role might seem like a mere continuation of the characters Hattie had played for her entire career, but at the time, Gone with the Wind was actually seen as a complete departure for her, a sudden arrival as a first-class dramatic actress with unexpected dimensions and complexities. Her staircase monologue with Olivia de Havilland was immediately called the greatest movie scene ever for a black actress, and Variety wrote that time will set a mark on this moment in the picture as one of those inspirational bits of histrionics long remembered. So going back to Hattie's route to the Oscars, she had the name recognition in the industry, and now she also had the right role in the right movie, connected with critical raves and her status as an audience favorite, who had fulfilled all ideas connected to a very well-known character, while humanizing the stereotype with her own presence and talents. For Hattie, it was clear right away that she had achieved a whole new level of success in her career, and suddenly, she was in a position that seemed completely impossible just a short while ago. Many reviews of her performance had already hinted at a possible Oscar nomination, some even speculating if she could achieve a history-making win. But at the moment, it did not seem that this kind of unprecedented victory was possible, because Hattie's position was still in no way comparable to that of her white co-stars. She had infamously not been allowed to attend the premiere of Gone with the Wind in Atlanta, nor could she attend parties and receptions to draw attention to her work like Vivien Leigh or Olivia de Havilland. And she also did not have the studio support of David O. Selznick, who, despite his own admiration for her performance, did not even plan to campaign her performance for an Academy Award. Despite all the critical acclaim for Gone with the Wind, it was not a given that it would dominate the 1939 Academy Awards. There was a lot of competition from movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or Wuthering Heights, which had won Best Picture at the New York Film Critics. Selznick therefore wanted to play it safe, to get as many nominations and later wins as possible. But this also meant to single out a few performers in his movies for the acting categories. From our modern perspective, we might see Vivien Leigh as one of the most logical Best Actress winners of all time, but in 1939, her win was actually not a foregone conclusion. Because Bette Davis, despite having won 2 Oscars already, was considered a very big threat or even a frontrunner to win her 3rd award for Dark Victory, the most praised performance of her career so far. Selznick, knowing that this would be a very close race, therefore decided to take a specific step to make sure that all attention in the Best Actress category would be solely on Vivien Leigh.
So he decided he must have got Jack Warner's permission to do this, to list me not as a star, which I was, but as a supporting actress.
This might sound pretty strange to hear, because Melanie is undoubtedly a supporting role in Gone with the Wind. But we need to understand the thinking behind this. The supporting awards, which had only been introduced a few years earlier, were meant to honor character actors and actresses without a big name, performers with less protection and less recognition. The leading categories, on the other hand, were for the studio's big stars. Which is for example the reason why Louise Reiner won Best Actress for The Great Ziegfeld. Today, she would undoubtedly be campaigned in supporting, but for MGM, Reiner was the new Garbo, the next big thing. There was no way they would promote her as a supporting actress. And this also explains why in the year of Gone with the Wind, Greer Garson was nominated for Best Actress for about 20 minutes of screen time in Goodbye Mr. Chips. After Louise Reiner's stardom had eclipsed as soon as it had risen, Greer was now MGM's next big thing, and again, an actress they considered a leading lady star. So essentially, leading and supporting were not about screen time, but about name recognition and a performer's standing in Hollywood. And Olivia de Havilland had this name recognition. She was maybe not the prominent leading lady she would become in the 1940s, but she was also definitely not one of the character actresses that had triumphed in this category so far. She was one of Warner's leading ladies, and she had also received star billing in Gone with the Wind. And so, despite her screen time, Olivia de Havilland pretty much expected to be considered a leading actress at the Oscars.
I never said a word when that happened, but of course it was a crushing blow. I never said a word.
So those were Selznick's priorities. Vivien Leigh for Best Actress and Olivia de Havilland for Best Supporting Actress, hoping that this strategy would increase both of their chances for a nomination and consequently for a win. Hattie McDaniel, on the other hand, was not a part of Selznick's push for the Academy Awards. But the actress knew that, for her, this was most likely a now or never moment, and took matters into her own hands, walking into David O. Selznick's office with a folder full of the great reviews she had received for her performance in Gone with the Wind, and asked him to promote her for Best Supporting Actress as well. She had to fight to get the same support that her co-star was given right away, to be even considered despite all her acclaim and hard work. For Olivia de Havilland, this consideration was essentially a disappointment. For Hattie McDaniel, it would mean a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And her perseverance paid off, as she could convince Selznick to push her performance for the Academy Awards. And she did indeed ultimately become the first black artist to ever receive an Oscar nomination. So Hattie McDaniel made history for the first time. Newspapers often highlighted this groundbreaking achievement in articles covering the nominations, giving Hattie a lot of publicity and attention, but the race itself was actually not covered very extensively at the time. Variety stated that Hattie did indeed have a chance to make history that night, while a few other articles that actually talked about Best Supporting Actress predicted Olivia de Havilland as the winner. I wouldn't say that this lack of comprehensive predictions for the category means that columnists were unimpressed with this lineup. Enthusiasm for Hattie's performance, but also her co-nominees, was definitely very high, but is simply a sign that the other categories were just far more exciting. Pretty much all the top races were more or less still completely up in the air. Gone with the Wind vs Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Vivien Leigh vs Bette Davis, Robert Donat vs James Stewart. Those were the topics most movie fans preferred to focus on. So coverage from 1939 and 1940 does not give us a lot of insight into the Oscar race for Best Supporting Actress, but we already know that Hattie had the necessary name recognition and a celebrated performance in the biggest movie of the year. But as mentioned at the beginning of this video, her co-nominees had equally intriguing narratives and advantages. So what were the additional circumstances that helped Hattie to make Oscar history? Well, first of all, she had the necessary studio support. David O. Selznick might have been hesitant at first to promote Hattie for an Oscar, but after the nominations were announced, he immediately switched most of his attention to her. Olivia de Havilland was, after all, not an employee of his studio. Hattie McDaniel, on the other hand, had just signed a contract with him. So for Selznick, a win for her now made much more sense strategically. At the same time, Jack Warner most likely had zero interest to see Olivia win an Oscar and increase her standing in Hollywood at a time when he actively tried to turn her into an obedient contract player. He most likely was more interested in getting the award for his other employee Geraldine Fitzgerald, but Wuthering Heights was not a movie from his studio, so I suppose that in the end he didn't care at all. 20th Century Fox and RKO, the studios behind Drums Along the Mohawk and Love Affair respectively, most likely felt that this category was dominated by Gone with the Wind, and Edna May Oliver and Maria Ouspenskaya were also not their contract players, so there was little interest for the studios to actively push the actresses for the award. On Oscar night, the atmosphere at the Biltmore Hotel indicated right away that a win for Hattie McDaniel was indeed a real possibility. Newspaper articles noted that when she entered the location, she was already given an enormous ovation by the other attendants. Which brings us to another factor in Hattie's win: industry support. During her many years in movies, she had made countless influential friends in Hollywood, among them Clark Gable, John Ford, Henry Fonda and Joan Crawford. This is not to say that her co-nominees were in any way unpopular or not equally established in the community, but there was a vast amount of big names in the industry who were actively and loudly rooting for Hattie, who knew how rare and important this moment was for her, and who openly supported her for a win that evening. But in this context, it is also important to notice that Hattie McDaniel was not only friends with many stars in front of and behind the camera, but that she was also very well known among another very large group of Oscar voters. At the 1936 Oscars, Academy President Frank Capra extended voting rights to extras in order to get support from the Screen Actors Guild for the awards. I talk about this in more detail in a video that I link below. These extras were a very significant voting body, counting between 8,000 and 10,000 people, and while there was often criticism that extras simply voted for whatever their studios told them to vote for, they certainly also had their own favorites. For example, Walter Brennan was an extra who slowly worked his way up to more significant parts, and extras admired him for achieving this step, helping him to win 3 Oscars in 5 years. And in this Best Supporting Actress lineup, Hattie McDaniel was the only contender who had equally worked her way up. She had played countless uncredited roles without any recognition and was now nominated for one of the most popular movies of all time. For many extras who hadn't made it yet, her story was an inspiration, especially compared to her 4 co-nominees who hadn't experienced the same kinds of hardships during their movie careers and had achieved stardom on the screen far easier than Hattie McDaniel. When Hattie's name was finally called as the winner of the Oscar, newspapers stated that the crowd gave her an ovation that was unparalleled in Academy history, and many articles about the ceremony later singled her historic triumph out in their headlines, calling her the star of the evening. Luella Parsons downright called it the most popular Oscar win of all time. But there was at least one person who was not too happy about it right away. Despite her disappointment about being nominated for Best Supporting Actress, Olivia de Havilland was still very keen to win, and she left her table after Hattie's speech to cry in the hotel kitchen. She would later say that for 2 weeks she believed there was no God, but she also added that, "One morning I woke up, filled with delight that I lived in a world where God was certainly present and where justice had indeed been done. I suddenly felt very proud that I belonged to a profession which honored a black woman who merited this in a time when other groups had neither the honesty nor the courage to do the same sort of thing." And this line of thinking, this "aren't we wonderful" attitude, can probably be seen as the final reason for Hattie McDaniel's win. I mean, just listen to Faye Bainter's introduction of the award.
To me it seems more than just a plaque of gold. It opens the doors of this room, moves back the walls, and enables us to embrace the whole of America. An America that we love. An America that, almost alone in the world today, recognizes and pays tribute to those who give of their best, regardless of creed, race, or color.
It was a tone that dominated much of the discussions around this win, as if the award was less for Hattie McDaniel, but rather for the white people who gave it to her. The industry felt very proud of itself for this decision, for its message of equality in a time when the war in Europe had just started and fascism was showing its ugly face in many parts of the world. Hattie's triumph was therefore seen as, quote, democracy in action, and the confirmation of the USA's moral superiority, Luella Parsons stating that only here could such a moment have happened.
This is one of the happiest moments of my life, and I want to thank each one of you who had a part in selecting me for one of the awards. For your kindness, it has made me feel very, very humble, and I shall always hold it as a beacon for anything that I may be able to do in the future. I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry.
So we have seen that many things needed to come together to make this historic moment in Oscar history possible. It's doubtful if another actress without Hattie's name recognition would have made the same impact on Oscar voters with the role of Mammy, but at the same time it's just as doubtful that Hattie could have had this success without this specific part in this specific movie. The right actress, who had slowly earned a lot of respect and showed a new side to her talents, the right role, the most famous realization of a well-known stereotype with far more significance to the plot and dramatic opportunities than ever before, the right movie, obviously, the support from a studio that actively wanted her to win over her 4 competitors, support from the industry that voted for the Oscars and was overwhelmingly on her side, and a win that fit into the atmosphere of the time. It was a perfect storm that carried Hattie to the Oscar stage and gave her an undeniable advantage over her co-nominees. Yes, there can and should be discussions about the roles for black performers during this time in Hollywood, but saying that Hattie McDaniel only won because she played a role that audiences were comfortable with sells her career, her own style of rebellion, her determination to stand out and make her characters her own, and all her talents incredibly short. For Hattie McDaniel, the Oscar win was obviously one of the biggest moments of her life, one that had seemed impossible for many years, and one she hoped might bring a change to the industry and her own career. But as we know, this would not happen. It took another 10 years for Ethel Waters to become the second black actress to be nominated for an Oscar, and 24 years to see another black performer actually win. For Hattie herself, the award did also not change the course of her career, as she continued to play the same kinds of roles she had played before Gone with the Wind. She again made history in 1947, when she became the first black woman to star in a network radio program with The Behlmer Show, playing a character that so far had been voiced by a white man. She also played the part on TV, but her career never again reached the height of 1939. The late 1940s saw a slow change to socially relevant movies that took a more serious look at race relations, and too many considered Hattie McDaniel a part of the past, someone who did not fit into this new world. Her final movie appearance was in 1949's The Big Wheel, before she died from breast cancer at the age of 59 in 1952. There is certainly much more to say about this fascinating artist, the difficulties of her career, the opposition she often faced during her life for the kinds of roles she played, but for me, it was important to highlight that while we can be critical of the fact that the Academy decided to award the first Oscar to a black performer for playing a slave, we have to remember how unique the circumstances of Hattie McDaniel's career were. That she herself would never have considered her roles as merely a servant or merely a slave, but living and breathing personalities, and that it was due to her own agency, her own decisions, her own years of hard work, and of course, her unique talents, that her character in Gone with the Wind could become the kind of success she turned out to be. As Hattie herself later said about her acting, "I did my best and God did the rest."